Saudi Arabia signals a new phase in Yemen after leading a month-long bombing campaign. It says the focus will now shift to diplomatic and political efforts. But can attacks give way to talks? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Jane Dutton. Saudi Arabia has called a halt to its military operation in Yemen known as Decisive Storm, saying its objectives had been achieved. But less than 24 hours after the announcement, it resumed a near month-long bombing campaign against Houthi rebels. The Gulf nation has been leading a coalition of Arab countries aimed at destroying Houthi military targets. Events escalated dramatically in August last year when Houthi rebels advanced south from their northern stronghold, seeking greater political voice and, ultimately, power. Backed by deposed President Ali Abdullah Saleh, the Saudi-led coalition sprung into action after elected President Abdurabu Mansur Hadi was forced to flee from the capital, Sana'a. The US-backed military campaign against the Houthis began on March the 26th. With Saudi Arabia heading a coalition that included 8 other Arab states: Egypt, Morocco, Sudan, Jordan, the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Qatar and Bahrain. The original goal was to remove the Houthis from the capital, Sana'a, and restore Hadi to power. Saudi Arabia has now announced a new phase to that campaign, adding a diplomatic and political dimension alongside military operations.
Legitimacy has been protected, and Yemeni citizens are no longer under threat as they were during the first days. The Houthi forces have lost huge parts of their capabilities, and we can confirm that it will not be a threat anymore to the neighboring countries or against the Yemeni people, and that the Yemeni governments will take all procedures to restore hope to Yemeni citizens through Operation Restoring Hope.
Yemen's president acknowledged the support of Saudi Arabia and other Arab states backing the coalition.
I express the deepest gratitude and respect to our Arab and Muslim brothers and friends in this exceptional strategic alliance in my name and on behalf of the Yemeni people. The alliance that supported legitimacy and which responded to the calls of Yemenis to serve its interests. A people who are looking to live and restore their state. This was the primary objective of Operation Decisive Storm.
But Abdurabu Mansur Hadi was also critical of Houthi rebels who forced him to leave for Saudi Arabia, where he is currently in exile.
I say with all honesty, we never imagined the scale of hatred and the pursuit for revenge from the Houthis. Evil took over their minds and conscience and allowed them to bring the country to the brink. The conspiracy accelerated after all Yemenis agreed on the foundations for building a new federal Yemen.
Reacting to the resumed airstrikes on Wednesday, a senior Houthi member said the aggression has not ended and nothing has changed. The group's leader had earlier denounced Saudi Arabia's involvement.
The Saudi regime has absolutely no right to interfere in our issues. This is our problem, this is our country, this is our regime, and we should determine our fate, and we should choose our government, and we as Yemenis should decide our regime. How it should be or how it should form our government, this is a private Yemeni issue.
Let's bring our guests in now. In London, Adam Barron, visiting fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations. In Berlin, Mamoun Abu Nowar, a military specialist and retired general in Jordan's Air Force. And in Washington, D.C., Lawrence Korb, senior fellow at the Center for American Progress and a former Assistant Secretary of Defense. Gentlemen, welcome. Mamoun Abu Nowar, let me start off with you. Why has Decisive Storm ended now? Have the military objectives been achieved?
Well, I think the Saudi favored to do that. Air campaign alone won't do political reform or write a constitution or bring the people to table. So they realize that. the changing the name to restore hope means, to my understanding, it's a political solution or political process. There was a missing element in this strategy, I think, mainly the Egyptian and the Pakistani, but the Saudi realized that when they've been asked to put some troops on the ground, and they declined to do that. They realized that this kind of war going to be a long war and a political solution is there. Having said that, I think tactical targets now are diminishing in a way, so you launch like 150 sortie with some targets. I mean, you already been bounded or bombed. So now the only thing the Air Force would do, I think, is protecting the sky. Air supremacy is there, preventing the Iranian from resupplying Houthi.
Yeah, because I was going to ask you about the military objective now, because since they called the end to Decisive Storm, we've seen ongoing fighting. We've seen the resumption of airstrikes.
And that will carry on, I think, for a long time. This is a very, very long process. The air campaign now will just handle pop-up target, what we call, and it's sudden targets come Houthi moving around or cutting their supply again. Like things in the ground will stay the same. I think that's going to be a very long process.
Lawrence, Korb, maybe it's more appropriate to say a diminishing air campaign by the Saudi Arabians and the coalition. How much of this was down to US pressure? I know that they were getting rather queasy about what they described as the collateral damage, which is obviously innocent people.
The United States was very much concerned about the civilian casualties because this was undermining the whole struggle that the United States is leading against a lot of the other elements, ISIS, for example, in that part of the world, because people see the Saudis as acting on behalf of the United States. They use American, equipment. The United States was furnishing intelligence and refueling their planes. So there's no doubt about the fact the United States was very concerned about the civilian casualties, particularly when you were not really achieving your military objective. There was no way in which you could defeat the Houthis without putting tens of thousands of ground troops in Yemen, and nobody was going to do that.
So if they weren't achieving their military objective, what do you think the objective was?
Well, the objective was to defeat the Houthis and put President Hadi and his regime back in. There was no way that they were going to be able to do that with just air power. And I think yesterday was a face-saving way out for the Saudis. They could say, well, we've accomplished our military objectives, and now we want to have a political and a negotiated solution, which I'm sure the United States was pressing them for, and I think Iran probably was pressing the Houthis. The Iranian foreign minister wrote an op-ed in the New York Times on Monday, basically, pushing that proposal forward.
Adam Barron, what do you make of this change of strategy?
I think what we're seeing now with the continuation of airstrikes over Sana'a suggests that this may just be sort of the same war under a different name. Obviously, we have seen a sharp decrease, and it looks like the strikes today have been much more targeted. But the question now is how things will shape up moving forward. I think it's very notable that in his speech, Hadi referred to the resistance fighters and to building a new national army. Many Yemenis have interpreted this as meaning that there will be some sort of training of an anti-Houthi force or continuing funding for anti-Houthi forces on the ground. There's the question of whether that's an overwrought interpretation. But I think it underlines the anxiety that most people on the ground are feeling regarding whether this war is over. Many people hope it's over. They want this to end as soon as possible. But as far as they're concerned, it's far too soon to say that this war is over, or for that matter, even ending.
Mamoun, what is your response to what Adam was saying there from a military point of view? And what was the coalition able to achieve on the ground, and where does it leave the Houthi capabilities?
As I said earlier, they really degrade the capability of the Houthi. They hit a very high-value target. Having said that, now they are run out of targets of things. So, as I said, they will look now for target of opportunity on the ground against the Houthi. Having said that, Yemen is around 200 tribes in total, and being characterized by violence. Every year you have thousands tribe clash among themselves. It's very hard, very complex to control Yemen. The tribe play a great role in Yemen. So I think now it's the tribal role. They have to come to a solution. Army of Yemen is weak. They cannot control Yemen. And what we are suggesting for solution, a stabilization force from where? Arab or UN. So it's a very hard to start even. Who's going to protect the civilian? Yemen is coming into crisis. It's collapsing, really. So you need now some people on the ground to control the situation. Who's going to do that? This is the big question now. Even if we have this Restore Hope campaign again and etc., who's going to control people on the ground? This is the problem. And they have this culture of revenge. It's very hard to control it also. So tribal leaders get to play a great role in the future process or political process in Yemen.
Well, possibly the UN will be brought in whether it likes it or not. So this might seem the appropriate moment to bring this information in, that the Gulf states have won backing from the United Nations Security Council in their quest to rein in the Houthis. A resolution was passed last week calling on the Houthis to withdraw their forces from areas they seized and to hand over all weapons they took from security and military institutions. It also calls on all countries to take immediate steps to stop sending weapons to the Houthis or Ali Abdullah Saleh, and for all parties in Yemen to commit to resolving their differences through dialogue. The resolution was adopted under the binding Chapter 7, which means it can be enforced by military action and sanctions. The Security Council is due to review this again on Monday. Lawrence, what do you think they're going to make of this, their findings, and how much time are they going to give all parties to comply?
Well, I think what will happen is we have to appoint a new UN mediator. The UN mediator had basically lost all credibility and resigned because he kept ignoring the problems. And I think what you would hope is that you can have an international force go in there to help work out these arrangements with the tribes. As our colleague just pointed out, that the tribes are the ones who have control. You may remember that in the 60s, the Egyptians sent 70,000 troops in there and couldn't bring the situation under control. In fact, lost 10,000. So I think you'd have to have an international force somewhat similar to what we had, for example, in the Balkans to work out an arrangement. I think eventually that Yemen is going to end up something like Lebanon, where you have a political arrangement that allows the various factions to have some power. And I think the U.S. putting their carrier battle group in there will prevent more arms from coming in. So hopefully that will give the parties the incentive to negotiate, and also help enforce the UN resolution, which says you're not supposed to be sending any more military supplies in there.
Mamoun, I'm wondering what you think that the passing of this resolution, and if all sides don't comply, what do you think it's going to prompt from a military point of view, and also where those ships that Lawrence brought up in the Gulf of Aden, that naval build-up, where it leaves that?
Well, concerning the Iranian vessels, as we hear the deployment of U.S. Navy, it's just to keep their option open, and it's sort of a deterrence indirectly to the Iranian. Iranians are weak in the sea, by the way, because the lack of air supremacy, and the Saudi Air Force or the U.S. Air Force couldn't handle that easily. So they're aware of that, and they won't do any, miscalculate anything before, the signing of a nuclear deal. So what I can see is, as the gentleman from Washington, is to appoint a new person from UN to start the negotiation. Also, you need some forces to protect this political process in a way, getting the tribal chief, which they are important. You know, the problem, the system there is the tribes over country. This is their system, and they follow the tribal chief order, not the country, rules, regulation. So you need to concentrate on the tribal chief to get them together also, and to start doing negotiation. Military options are very rare. I don't think it's going to solve the problem in Yemen.
Adam, considering those complexities, the tribal issues, does any of this action push the political process forward? And how do you bring in all the parties to the table?
I think the key in order to bring the political process forward is a ceasefire, not just a ceasefire in the sense that the Saudis stop bombing and the Saudi-led coalition stops bombing, but also a ceasefire in the fact that the Houthis pull back from Aden and ties in other areas in the south of the country as well. It's very hard to see any sort of political process moving forward as long as the bombs are falling. And unfortunately, that's just a fact. I think we do have a very complex situation in terms of Yemen. The tribal element is important. And when we speak of the tribes, it's important to remember that when we look at the northwest of the country, the vast majority of tribal leaders in that area have thrown in their lot with the Houthis. Each time the Houthis have managed to achieve a military victory, they were smart. They'd get rid of, their tribal opponents, but then the other tribesmen in the area, they would be sure to sign a peace agreement with them. So that would mean that we'd have to deal with a sort of, in order to get these tribal leaders to break with the Houthis, the ones that are remaining in much of northwest Yemen, you'd be talking about a full-scale tribal revolt.
It seems that Ali Abdullah Saleh, the former strongman of Yemen, is distancing himself now from the Houthis. Do you think this will have a negative political impact on the Houthis, or what sort of political impact will it have?
I think there's no question that the Houthis would never be as strong as they are today now were it not for this alliance of convenience with Ali Abdullah Saleh. And we're talking in terms of politics, on political level, we're talking in terms of a military level. They've benefited quite a lot from the fact that, let's face it, Saleh has control, or rather had control, of some of the most powerful arms of Yemen's military. The capabilities of these units, whether we're talking about the ballistics, whether we're talking about the Air Force, have effectively been decimated. So even if the Saleh and the Houthis stay together, they're weakened. And if Saleh continues distancing himself from the Houthis, which it looks like he is doing, at least rhetorically, I think we look at a situation where the Houthis are weakened.
Lawrence, where does this leave the political process? I mean, is there place for Ali Abdullah Saleh?
Well, I think he's going to have a role. Remember, Hadi who's the president now, was his vice president. I think what they have to settle on is a candidate that Hadi and Saleh both support. People have talked about the current vice president for President Hadi, maybe somebody who can bring them together. But as just been pointed out, Saleh has been on both sides of this. When he was running the country, he was very tough on the Houthis, and he did join up with them recently, which led to the current situation. And now that he's pulling back, I think is an important signal, because he and the people loyal to him are going to have some role in stabilizing the country when this fighting ends and we come to some sort of agreement.
Lawrence, do you think that the U.S. was expecting the Iranians to possibly do more in this conflict, to be possibly more of a peace broker?
I think so, because as has been pointed out already, the Iranians' main priority right now is the nuclear deal. Second priority is dealing with ISIL, particularly in Iraq. So this is not high on their agenda. And one of the things that has been lost in this discussion is AQAP enhances control in Yemen, and that is a threat both to the Iranians and to the Western countries. So I do think that they would like to get this situation under control. Yes, they aid the Houthis, but they don't give them the same amount of support, for example, as they give Hezbollah.
I want to pick up on your point about AQIP, which is obviously, Mamoun, the al-Qaeda in Yemen, a particularly fierce branch of al-Qaeda. There was a real concern that the fighting would open the way for al-Qaeda to grow, to take advantage of this situation, including ISIL. What's to be done about them?
I think, yeah, they live in chaos, Al-Qaeda, and they will expand, even ISIL. Having said that, Iran is not a game changer in in Yemen. It could be on Syria and Iraq, but as Brent said, it play a little influence in Yemen in a way. They support the Houthi at the center with weapon, but they have no that great influence. Deals is possible as a solution now, could be possible. There is so many countries involved in that, mainly Oman, Muscat. There's some meetings going on. The Russian are getting involved, the Iranian, the Egyptian, the Emirates. So we might see a possible deal at the end of tunnel, but that's going to be a very, very long process. Yemen is collapsing, and if the international community did not interfere, really, there's going to be a civil war and fragmented Yemen.
Adam, I'm intrigued to know what you think about what this says about Arab states' willingness to now go to war, particularly Saudi Arabia. And what does it say about its foreign policy and maybe cutting its ties with the US?
Well, I think it's important to remember that Saudi Arabia has always viewed Yemen as its backyard, in the sense that there's always been a very strong Saudi influence in Yemen, whether we're talking about in the aftermath of the 1960s civil war. And let's remember that in the 1960s civil war, you effectively had a proxy war between Egypt and Saudi Arabia and Yemen, or the decades that followed, where Saudi Arabia had very close relationships with a number of very powerful tribal leaders in Yemen. So I think even though this is a whole different shape of Saudi influence, it's not surprising in the least to see Saudi Arabia exercising this degree of influence in Yemen. Historically, it makes a tremendous amount of sense.
Lawrence, is this a sign that we are seeing Sunni Arab states in particular coming together, and the fact that they're also discussing putting together a joint military force as put forward by Egypt? What does that say?
Well, there's no doubt about the fact that a lot of the countries, particularly Saudi Arabia, are unhappy with the fact that the United States is not as involved in that region as we once were, or they think we should. And I think the fact that they have basically not only in dealing with Yemen, but also dealing with ISIL in Syria, they've put together this coalition, I think, is a sign that they want to ensure that their interests are protected. And I think in the long term, what they're looking for is to ensure that if we can get a nuclear deal with Iran and we can roll back the gains of ISIL, that Iran doesn't become the dominant power in the region, and it become an expansionist power. I think that's what they're looking in the long term, and hopefully if we get a nuclear deal and then we can bring back Iran into the family of nations to accept international rules, and somehow we can work out, or they can work out an arrangement between the Sunni-led coalition of the Saudis and the Shiites of Iran.
Mamoun, as the country now claws itself out of this humanitarian catastrophe, as the International Red Cross called it just today, we've got damaged infrastructure, many people have been killed. Ultimately, is it up to the Yemenis to determine their future?
It is the Yemeni who should determine their future. It is the Yemeni should be getting involved. Countries should help him out to do that. Otherwise, the Yemeni crisis will spill around the region, and that could lead to a confrontation amongst regional power, I could say. Iran is playing a great role also. I might re-emphasize it again. If they have the deal with the US, they will be a dominant power in our part of the world. There is a Shia jihadism. They don't take, their sphere of influence, they will, surround the Gulf all over the place if they got now the Yemen interest, sphere of influence.
Let's leave it there. Mamoun Abu Nowar talking to us from Berlin, Adam Barron in London, and in Washington, D.C., Lawrence Korb. Thank you very much, gentlemen. And thank you for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. As always, we'd love to hear your thoughts. You can get in touch with us on our programme page at aljazeera.com. Post your comments at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or tweet us. Go to @AJ Inside Story and @Jane Dutton. From all of the team, goodbye. Thanks for watching.